you often say reality is one single indivisible whole, and so there's nothing separate from that. It's also described as the consciousness only model, non-duality, idealism. So where you've both arrived at is am I right in saying it's exactly the same spot? Bernardo?
Pretty much, yeah.
I think you'd have to put Bernard.
It's interesting when you're asking a group for one answer. It's like, who's actually going to answer? Because it has to be some individual, right? It's this. It's a very good example, actually, right? So it's you can only appeal to a group for an answer by at least one of the individuals answering, right? You can't say no individuals have to answer, the group has to answer, right? It might not be the exact situation here, but if you understand my meaning, so the point is there is no group, there is no us, there is no we, there are only the individuals. A philosophy always comes from some individuals who have said, I have a philosophy, right? There's no philosophy floating around. You could sort of, look, there's a philosophy over there, right? They're only individuals. And the problem is individuals believing in some kind of group mentality somewhere is the problem. The belief in it is the problem, not that it exists, right? But if you can convince sufficiently an amount of people of this groupthink, well, then they will act as if there is a group, even if there isn't, right? What is a group? It's a set of individuals. So does one individual come with a little bit of group? And when there are two individuals, there's a little more group. And three individuals, there's a little more group, and so on, right? If you take one person out of a group, does a little bit of the group disappear? Well, an individual, it disappears, right? Or moves away in a sufficient distance or something. But what you're removing is not group, but an individual. So if you're saying that something happened to a group because an individual disappears, well, then if there's a change in that group, some of that group has to disappear with that individual. Well, please show me where that group thing is. It isn't there, right? So it's just sort of a side note here, right? Okay, let's dive in.
And my understanding under a very powerful microscope to find any differences between us.
Okay, well, that's a fantastic place to start. So, right, let's then.
So that must be an analogy, right? A microscope. Are you studying philosophy with a microscope? Okay, so it's an analogy, right? Why are you using an analogy to point out the differences? Because I would like to hear about those differences, right? I suppose they may arrive later in this podcast here, but it's like when people start to say, if I ask somebody, right, let's say I'm sitting at a table or whatever, having a beer, whatever, okay, they talk about society. And I ask, okay, can you show me society? Right? Let's take another example. Maybe we did that with the last one with the group and so on, right? If I've never seen a ball before, right? have lived in a jungle, and some colonizer arrives and speaks to me about a ball. Well, if I haven't experienced ball before, how would you go about explaining ball to me as that strange person on that previously considered the deserted island? Well, you could say something like, well, it's like an orange, right? It's not far off, right? It's like an orange because of the roundness and so on. Maybe you couldn't eat a ball like you could eat an orange and so on, right? I guess you could. But my point is, what I'm trying to get to, when you say it is like something, you are specifically not talking about the thing, right? you're talking about a different thing that has similarities as an analogy to it, right? So when he says, when you're trying to, in that situation, if I haven't heard of a ball before, right, then it's difficult to, explain what a ball is. You could maybe do something about air and plastic, whatever, leather, whatever, right? But the point is, when you are talking about something that is harder to understand and you make an analogy, I would think it's because you are trying to avoid the direct addressing directly what is actually what you're trying to talk about, right? Using a microscope. You're not using a microscope on philosophy. Come on, man, right? So is that a sufficient answer? It's like I'm saying, yeah, I think I can come up with something. Well, I was, I can't come up with something that is similarly weird, right? But it's, I'm deconstructing this in a way where I try to point out what I react on, what I notice. It's not necessarily that it is this exact thing is not a biggie, right? But it's it all adds up to a bigger picture of things here, right? So a little thing doesn't matter. I'm saying some weird stuff sometimes, and I have to think about what the hell was I actually saying there, right? But I'm doing this on the fly, right? So I'm just trying to point out that if I point out these sort of aspects that are sort of trying to circumvent direct addressing specific things that might be of good interest here, right? If there's enough of those situations, it's like it's not really too good, right? Okay, let's
begin with a bit of a dismantling process in terms of the way that culture at large
culture at large, right? Now, he's saying culture at large, and they have a term called mind at large, right? You see, it's very close, right? Mind at large, culture at large, right? Mind and culture is sort of analogous here, right? It's used in the same reference. Linguistically, it's used the same term. And, I don't know if semantically, but at least sort of grammatically or syntax wise, linguistically, I think it would be the right way to say it, right? It's used in the same way. Culture at large and then mind at large, right? Is culture something that is floating around inside your mind? Does culture have a color? Does it have a sound? Does it have a taste? Does it have a feel? Does it have a smell? If I can't experience it directly, how do I go about it? Where does it come from, right? And these things that are just thrown around as if it's given. Culture at large. And you could also ask the question, what is the difference between culture and culture at large, right? It's not everybody in the world who says culture at large. So maybe they're just saying culture. Maybe they're using even a different term, right? So it's just one of these again, right? These keeps coming up as if it's given, right? That's not how you do good, in metaphysics, in my opinion, right?
believes that reality is, how people believe what is going on and all that kind of stuff. So that brings us obviously to materialism or physicalism, and also our intuitions about reality. So for me right now, if I feel like there is a world out there, I can see out the window, there are cars, there are houses.
No, that's not a world out there. You don't get the point, mate. Okay, you're not as smart as I thought, right? Maybe you are, lagging behind. When you're looking out the window, out of your eyes, what you are saying is, it's actually something inside me that is represented in a way so it feels as if I'm looking through my eyes, right? When you're saying the world out there and you're talking about cars and so on, those cars are not out there, right? At least not that experience you're having, you're referring to as car. That is in your mind. If you're working from that inside-outside dichotomy, right? I mean, it's like they should stop him. No, you don't understand the basics here, man. Maybe I heard wrong here, but that's how I understood it, as if a car is out there, right? Maybe he said it in a way where he means it differently, but this is the fucking paradox that is potentially built into the materialist. Maybe he's just, devil's advocate here, something like that. I don't know. I'm not quite sure, right? But this has to be settled very, very clearly what they're talking about. You can't just ask in this way as, I mean, if he asks these questions in a way that explicitly almost says that he doesn't understand what he's talking about, how is he sufficiently geared towards asking the right questions to these two idealists, man, right?
There are pavement, there's sky, it's cloudy. I, in the form of a body, would walk out of the door. Inside that body, there is a mind and a self that is...
Be careful, mate, right? When you're saying body, are you referring to the experience you call body, or that which the experience is based on, right? Now, this might be sort of a devil's advocate kind of question he's doing here, so they can explain what they mean. I will grant him that, possibly, right? But it's this thing, when you're saying body, are you referring to the experience or that which you believe the experience is based on, right? Because that which you're referring to is not moving anywhere. It's in your mind. There's something potentially doing whatever it's going on there, doing and going on is even, saying too much, right? But that which the experience is based on is doing, quote, something, right? You do not have access to that. You don't know what that is. You can't get knowledge of it, right? Because you can't experience it, and you need experience in order to have knowledge, at least in my opinion, right? Otherwise, what the hell would knowledge even mean if you could just conjure up whatever you want as knowledge, right? Then Santa Claus exists and, the Tooth Fairy, right? Where was I going? Yeah, it's like, this is very important to settle clearly what you're talking about. And maybe, as I say, he's doing a devil's advocate kind of, or taking the knowing that he understands this, but he's speaking as if he is a third party asking these weird kind of questions, my body's and so on, right? Okay, let's do it.
It's deciding to walk down the road and perhaps get in a car or go to the shop or whatever. And if I ran into a wall, it would hurt, etc. So it's a world of things, and I am a thing within that just happens to have a mind within it. That seems to me to be the sort of the everyday understanding of reality. Is that about right, would you say?
Okay, so I'm sorry, mate. I was a bit ahead of you there, right? So that he is pretending to ask the question that the materialist, the default metaphysics would ask, right? Okay, fair enough.
That's the average everyday understanding. Yeah.
But it's wrong.
It's certainly wrong.
Wrong? What does it mean that it's wrong, right? But what does it, I mean? Okay, in these ends of metaphysics, we need to be fucking clear what you're talking about, right? What a metaphysics itself cannot be wrong as such, I would say. But if you find something in the thinking that is explicitly, maybe implicitly, self-contradictory or paradoxical, then I would say it doesn't work. I wouldn't say it's wrong. I would just say there is a problem here you need to address, right? And materialism ends up with the heart problem and all that, right? And why can't we experience other minds? If you can experience all that other shit out there, right? Why can we not experience minds, right? The problem of the mind. A metaphysics cannot be wrong as such, but it depends on what you mean by wrong. If you mean that there's a problem built into it, okay, we're on the same page, right?
Yeah. Could you just explain,
I mean, a paradox built into it.
Bernardo, actually, just to start, how our intuitions then mislead us?
Mislead us. What do you mean by being misled, right? I mean, it seems to me people are able to go to the bus and do all these sort of, external world experiences and treat them as if they are out there. And they go through 75 years and 80 years of a life and none the wiser, and they potentially had a good life without it, right? I mean, all these anxious philosophers sitting here, they don't look like they're having a good life, right? They look like they're fucking confused and deep in woo-woo shit and anxiety and God knows what, right? I mean, misled? It's the functional default setting. You can get through life without understanding that the experience you have is not the actual thing out there if you're working from an out there, inside-outside dichotomy, right? It worked fine for me for almost 50 years until I suddenly realized it's screwed, right? So, what is misleading about it? There's a paradox in it, right? And if you discover a paradox, I mean, it sort of leads in contradiction. If you go one way, it points in the other way, and you go the other way, it points in the first way, or something like that, right? So it sort of it starts to point in two opposite directions of some kind, where you are left with basing it on something that cannot possibly be the case to the best of one's understanding, right? If you say your experience is outside your experience, right? That doesn't work, right? I mean, if that can work in a philosophy, I'm not sure I want to philosophize, right? So at some point there has to be, no, that doesn't work. I'm not going there, right? And rightfully, these two guys are pointing that out, right? And I would point that out also. But if you mean a philosophy, a metaphysics is wrong, if there's a contradiction or a paradox in it, fine. Then we are on the same page, right?
Nature has provided us with a set of sense organs, sensors, eyes, ears, nose, and the result of this sensing of the world is presented to us as what we call perception. But if you think of it, perception is like...
He is also leaning against this problem, right? The senses, but I mean, do you think of them as the abstract understanding of a sense as an information channel as such, or are you referring to an eye or an ear or a tongue or whatever, olfactory, what the hell are they called, right? Because you have to have that sense data before you can create the senses as a representation on that experience. Well, then it has already traveled through your senses, right? So that representation, even if that keeps coming, updated data flow, is still a representation that is created after the fact of the senses, right? So that representation of those senses is a mental representation of something you do not have access to. You just call that senses, a point to it as if it's outside yourself, right? If you're pointing to that which you do not have access to. And it's just this, I want this to be clear. Because if people don't get this, the rest of this doesn't really matter, because they're so confused about what the hell we're talking about, or you're talking about, and he's talking about, doing this kind of metaphysics, right? It's only going to, make things worse. People are going to solidify themselves in their materialism, which honestly, if these guys are into that kind of woo-woo that I expect to hear about in a moment, right? Or as this progresses, I would rather have my run-of-the-mill kind of materialist, because at least they are limited to what they can experience in an empirical fashion, right? It seems to me that idealists, they invent all sorts of pie in the sky weirdness in order to feel, I'm looking for a word, inhibit their anxiety, right? That the anxiety of potentially realizing there is something you can't get to, right? And if you can't get to it, you can't lecture people about it, right? If you have to say, I can't get to it, you can't even say I can know it. I don't know what it is, because that would implicitly entail that you could possibly get knowledge of it. That's not possible, in my opinion, because you need those damn experiences, right? So it's like it's unavailable, right? And leaving a big hole somewhere that is unexplained is, I guess, sort of an anxiety fear that somebody else might go and explain it and lure people into some kind of philosophy we don't want them to. So we need to label it somehow so we have, control of the peasants, right? That's sort of what I sort of deep down between the lines feel that might be going on, right?
Just a dashboard of instruments. It's like you're a pilot in an airplane, and instead of having a transparent windshield, there is only aluminium, and all you can see is the dashboard of instruments in front of you, which provide us with sense data. There are sensors.
Provide us, again, there's this, I mean, I know that he's saying it's difficult to say that provides me with. Then the next question would be, well, is it only you? No, it's also you and you, I would say. And he's sort of implicitly working from an axiom that every other individual like him has the same kind of experience and so on, right? It's implicit in what he's saying. But nobody seems to state these kinds of axioms because they are axiomatic. They are not. Otherwise, they are just bridging that gap to other minds without addressing the problem, right? That's what they're doing. If we are having experience, he's saying, I am having experience and you have a similar kind of experience. That's what's implicit in what he's saying. Well, how can he say that if there's a problem of other minds? You can't get to other minds. So he can't know what I'm experiencing, right? He can't get to my experiences. He can just say, hey, you have an experience. But what does he base that on? Just choosing to say it. Well, that's the same as saying I'm working from the axiom that other individuals has the same kind of experience as me. And he does not state it explicitly. And that's a problem, in my opinion, because that's bad philosophy. You're just serving it as if sort of it's obvious, right? I don't even have to philosophize about it. I'm just serving it raw. And of course it's this way because I sort of need it to be this way, right? So 6 years of PhD study has led to, of course it's this way. Right? I'm not really impressed about that, right?
Outside the airplane, providing you with sense data, accurate information about the world. But of course, the dashboard doesn't look like the world. It provides relevant and accurate sense data about the world.
Relevant and accurate? How the hell does he know about that? How does he get to that insight that it's accurate and information? Accurate compared to what? Has he been out there? Hey, yes, this elephant your experiences is accurate because I know that object out there I do not have access to is represented in your mind as an elephant and therefore it's accurate. How does he get to it? How does he get to that? There's another one of these leaps where it's like, it's just given to me. It's accurate and it's information. How does he get to that? Right? He doesn't think he needs to argue that. It's just, it's given, man. Yeah, I have a PhD. I have 2 PhDs. So of course it's given because I'm Mr. Philosophy, right?
But it doesn't look like the world as it is in itself. The problem is we are born inside that cockpit. We have never peeked out a transparent window to see the world as it actually is.
There is no transparent window. right? It's an untransparent window. There is no window. There is a wall in your living room where there's shit going on, you could say, analogous, on the wall, but you can't look through the wall, and you can't stick your arm through the wall, you can't peek through the wall, and so on, right? The experiences are on the wall, and you're looking at those experiences thinking, what the hell are those experiences? This looks like something that might be outside my mind, right? But then the problem is, materialists or idealists say, but it can't be outside your mind if you're experiencing. It must be inside your mind, right? And all this. Then you can't get out on the other side. There is no way of getting out there, right? Why can't they see this? Is it because they don't want it to be like that? As I alluded to a bit just before. It's sort of we don't like these dark oceans without a shore where we can't tell people this is what is there, right? There are ripples. This thing about leaving the shit alone, right? That's something that most people apparently is not capable of. They refuse to settle on I can't get to it. That's my standpoint at this point in time about what is going on with this, right? The materialists do not realize that they are not experiencing an actual outside, right? The idealists understand this, and then they go onto that outside and start to tell you what is there. That is, if not equally crazy, then even more crazy than the materialists, right? And it's because if a materialist becomes an idealist, they're used to this. We can science the shit out of this, and we can explain the whole universe, right? So I need to be able to go to that thing I can't go to and try somehow and throw abstractions at it until I'm convincing somebody that I'm actually describing that inaccessible realm, right? I don't buy it. I will never fucking buy it, I think, right? Because the more I listen to this, the more woo-woo shit I get thrown at, right? And it's kind of obvious from the axioms you're working from. If you're saying there is an outside, it's the same as saying I can't get to it, right? Because your mind is... You are in that mind, as he says, you're born into this thing that you can't get out of, your experience. And when you get to the point where you say there might be an outside, that must be derived from some kind of experience or abstraction or idea within that mind, right? There is nothing in the experience as such that necessitates there being an outside. It's a leap you're taking. It's an axiom you're stating. I am working from the axiom that there is an outside, and my experiences is to some degree a reflection, you could say, or a derivative or a representation of that outside, right? Now, when you say that what you have is experience, then that which you're experiencing must necessarily be of a different kind than your experiences, right? Otherwise, why the hell would you have the experiences? You are having the experiences because you can't get to that outside. The best you can do is create those experiences. Or whatever's going on there is doing it, right? You're not deciding to do it, I suppose, right? So I think that the problem they end up identifying is, this sounds like dualism, right? Ooh, that's bad. Ooh, dualism, right? The difference between dualists who want to explain, okay, I am inventing some other stuff that is different. Mind is different from what is outside mind. So I'm explaining that outside in a scientific manner. I will turn it around and say, I have access to mind, but I don't have access to the rest of it, right? The other kind, right? So I'm stuck with my experiences, but I still have those representations, right? That's what you work from.
All we have is the dashboard. So we talk in terms of the language of the dashboard. We don't talk about the storm outside. We talk in terms of wind speed, direction of movement, air pressure, which is what the dashboards of instruments provide us. And we end up concluding that the world is the dashboard, because that's all we ever had. Our language evolved around that. Our thinking evolved around that. But of course, although the dashboard is useful, you can fly by instrument, and we need the sensors and the dials and the dashboard to navigate life and survive. Obviously, the world as it is in itself is not a dashboard. It doesn't look like a dashboard. And that's where things go wrong, because we are cooped up in that cockpit. We think in terms of the dials, and we forget that the real world is that which is being sensed, that which is being measured, and not the needles inside the dials inside your dashboard of instruments.
Rupert, Bernardo mentioned our perceptions. So when I go outside and I see cars, houses, people, etc., actually, what I'm seeing is seeing, the perception of seeing, the perception of hearing, perception of feeling, etc. So can you just talk a little bit about that, about how that is what we're seeing, but superimposed on top of that is the idea of things?
Yes, there is experience. We're having an experience, or we are experiencing. And we extrapolate from this fact a model which, as you rightly described in your introduction to this question, the model of a mind or a self inside the body, looking out through our sense perceptions of what we consider to be, we consider our sense perceptions to be a transparent windscreen through which we look and get an accurate picture of reality, whereas, as Bernardo has just explained, no, our sense perceptions are limited. They filter reality, and they make reality appear in a way that is consistent with their own limitations, just like one who wears orange-tinted glasses sees orange snow. And well, if you wear orange-tinted glasses when you're skiing in the mountains for long enough, you forget you've got the glasses on. And you think that the way you're seeing the snow is the way it really is. And then at the end of the day, you take your glasses off and you think, oh, I had forgotten that I was viewing a filtered picture of the reality. That the glasses are so close to me that I had forgotten them. And that I thought that I was just looking through the clear windscreen of...
So basically the analogy is you're living inside the glasses. You're living inside the lens of the glass. So it's glass everywhere. It's like the fish living in water, trying to convince it that it's living in water. So what the hell are you talking about? It's everywhere. It's everywhere, right? Yes. Personally, I think you have to point to the paradox in the physicalism in order to convince people that there's something wrong there, right? You might not succeed. I have tried with several people and didn't succeed because they're like, what are you talking about, right? It's like you're trying to screw with me, right? I think the just saying, well, it's like a windscreen. It's like, I understand the analogy, absolutely, no problem there. But I don't think that if you're talking to somebody who does not understand the problem in physicalism, will understand that it sounds like you're just coming up with something that sounds fanciful, right? Sort of halfway woo-woo maybe, or something like that. I think the idea to convince people is to point to the paradox. And that is saying, as I've done a couple of times in this video, that when you experience elephant, is that elephant in your mind? Something like that, right? I'm just, taking it for a walk here. And then people say, no, the elephant is outside my mind. Okay, if that elephant you're talking about is outside of your mind, how can you experience it? Doesn't it have to be inside your mind in order for you to experience it? Right? It is very difficult for people to understand it, I find it difficult to explain this in a way, personally, right? In a way that doesn't sound like you're trying to trick people, right? You're not trying to create some, what would that be? Some trick. It sort of is, it sounds like sophistry, something like that, right? You're trying, but the elephant you experience, is that outside? If an experience is, it must be inside, because an experience is a part of your mind. And if you're saying it's outside, what are you referring to then? If what you're talking about is an elephant that you're experiencing, right? I don't think the other, just coming up with the analogy that you're born inside a cockpit or something like that, I think it's too directly, it's too elaborate from the start. It has to start more simply. And I think a good idea would be, if you're discussing these things with people and they don't understand the paradox that are built into their potential physical metaphysics, is that, but okay, we can't continue this discussion of philosophical discourse, if you do not understand that there's a paradox built into what you're saying here, right? To the best of my understanding, there's a paradox in what you're saying. You're saying that experience is both inside your mind and outside your mind at the same time. How does that work, right? Because if you need to open your eyes, so to say, in order to get the experience, wasn't there an elephant outside as long as you have closed your eyes, or what? And then if people say, yes, there was an elephant there, how the hell do you know that? You didn't even have experience of elephant, right? So it seems like every time you open your eyes, elephant, close eyes, no elephant, open eyes, elephant, close eyes, no elephant, right? There seems to be something going on there that you control in order to have the experience. So if every time you do something that is not elephant, but your experience of elephant disappears, how does that work, right?
Of my eyes. So, and this is because our sense perceptions, as Bernardo said, that they're so close to us. We've forgotten that we are, so to speak, wearing them like glasses.
I don't think we have forgotten. I think we have never realized it. Or individuals who work from a materialist default setting, they haven't realized that it's not the case, right? I mean, I was like that, until some 10 years ago or something, like. Until I, was sufficiently geared towards philosophical rigidity to realize that this is screwed up. It doesn't work. It's self-contradictory. It's paradoxical, right? You can't both be outside and inside at the same time. It has to be one of them. So what is the starting point? Well, you're starting with your own experiences. Okay, so how do I get to that outside? Well, I can't just jump outside and say that I have access to some outside. Well, so it's this kind of ground floor approach that it needs to be that simple in order to get under the skin of people, I think, personally, right? Even though I haven't had that much success with it, right? And just a caveat, don't try it with your children, right? If you have children in sort of a early teenagers or preteens or something like that, right? Don't talk about this. Let them have their materialism, and then when they're grown up, maybe you can enlighten them on this. If you need to, right? I mean, it's like if you are working with philosophy all day long, you possibly need to do it. Otherwise, you would be sort of feeling that you were sort of, cheating your children or something like that. But they will not understand that what you experience as their father or their mother is not their actual father and mother. That is very, very, very problematic, right? So please don't tell this to your children until they are grown up enough to understand and be able to handle the insight, right? And maybe this problematic thinking in this regard has, maybe if there has been this insight earlier, then it has been weeded out because people telling their children this would run into problems, maybe, right? I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm just warning you, be very considerate about telling this to your children or talk about this topic with your children, right?
Or like a VR headset. And we presume that the model of reality that they present to us is how reality actually is. No, it's just how reality appears when it's filtered through the limitations of a human mind.
You mentioned the senses, and obviously, so we've got seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. So these five sensory organs.
I like that. I like that this guy is grounding himself in what he can experience. He is early on appealing to empiricism, right? It's a good thing to have some starting point, which is actually implicitly alluding to here that there's a reduction base that needs to be settled on. It needs to be grounded in qualia, you could say, right? It has to be grounded in the qualia. If you can't trace your philosophy at any given point in the future back to that reduction base, there must be something problematic with that philosophy, right? You have screwed up with the philosophy. And if it's good philosophy, in my opinion, it needs to be something that every fucking individual can have access to directly without anybody explaining it, right? And that might be that which cannot be explained, right? Because then you're avoiding people trying to explain it to you, right?
So we have 5 ways of experiencing, should we say, and then we also have the equivalent number of organs to help us in that. Is the coincidental nature of that in anything worth commenting on?
Absolutely. You're right. As human beings, we experience seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. And we experience the world in the form of sights, sounds, tastes, textures, and smells. Is that a coincidence? Of course not. There's a direct correlation. Let's say we had a sixth. Well, we have a sixth sense, that thinking. But let's say there was let's just talk about perception. Let's say there was a sixth way of perceiving: seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling, and let's call it Xing. Let's say there was some experience called Xing. We would experience X's out there. Yeah. Or if there was something called Y-ing, we would experience Y's out there. So
and
yes,
we would say, that's how the world is.
What?
And then we would say, that's how the world really is. X's and Y's out there.
In other words, the world is not what we see, it is the way we see.
Yes.
It's reality. I'm not... And Bernardo and I both, we both make this point over and over again to prevent this understanding from sliding into solipsism. I'm not saying, I know Bernardo is not saying that all their...
There's a problem with solipsism, right? You can't explain to a solipsist that they shouldn't be solipsist, right? Because they're not taking you seriously, because they're solipsist, right? Another point is that people claiming to be solipsist, if there aren't any, by the claim they're making, hey, I'm solipsist, don't say this to me, they're implicitly not being solipsist in that moment by apparently talking to their experiences, supposedly, right? Again, we can't get to, we don't know if they're zombies, right? But nobody is, to the best of my interpretation of what is going on out there, nobody acts as if they are. Even if they claim to be solipsists, they're not acting as such. So because they're not acting as such, I will not consider them solipsists, even if they claim to be, right? It might just be a trick to confuse me and be, hey, I'm alone with my experience, don't tell me, something like that, right? Okay.
Is to reality is our individual experience of it. Reality precedes the finite mind or its observation. But the finite mind filters.
Finite mind? I thought it was mind everywhere. Now, I'm not sure they have stated this yet in this experience. Finite mind and mind at large. So the finite is your personal mind, your little section of mind, right? I don't like this minded large shit.
Reality and makes it appear to us in a way that is consistent with the limitations of our sense faculties. It's what William Wordsworth beautifully said when he said, we half create and half perceive the world. We perceive it in the sense that what we're looking at is what's real. It's the reality that precedes the human mind, the mind. But we create it in the sense that we lend it its appearance. And this beautiful understanding that the world as we experience it it's an interaction between reality and the finite mind. The world borrows its realities from something that is way bigger than the finite mind, but it borrows its appearance from the finite mind.
I'll come back to that solipsism point very soon, but quick.
This is very. I basically agree. I think, right, but it's very sort of cloud castle, right? So, what your starting point? I'm just adding to this, right? This is just my side note here, right? I'm not criticizing anything here or deconstructing. An approach is, but what would the starting point be? That would be something in mind, right? Mind itself is not an experience, right? And that would also lend itself to why you can't experience other minds, because you can't experience mind. So in my opinion, you can't make mind the foundation of your metaphysics because it's inexperiential. It's an abstraction. It's an idea. It's an umbrella term for all the stuff that goes on in you, so to say, right? The starting point must be your experience, right? Or at least that's a good starting point in mind. You could maybe do something differently, but I would possibly not take it seriously, right? I'm willing to listen, right? But so if you're starting with an experience, how do you get beyond experience? If you're starting to say there's something outside my experience, you can make the statement, but how would you have any access to what that might be, other than there might be some goings on within my mind, within my experiences, that relates to that. Somehow I could treat it as such, you could say, right? So it's axiomatically stated, it's not reasoned. You're not reasoning your way to outside experiences, right? If there is an outside, that outside cannot be the experiences, right? Because then the experience is also the outside, and then there is no outside, right? Because you made that dichotomy of the inside-outside, you are necessitating that which is beyond the inside is different from the outside, in my opinion, right? And that's why you can't get to it, because you need your experiences to add anything. I've said this before, right? But it doesn't hurt to reiterate it.
Bernardo, can you just explain? So why then do we have the perceptions appear as they do? Why do they not more accurately reflect reality?
Perceptions. Maybe
we don't more. What do you mean by more? It's like it's a matter of degree here, right? Be careful, mate. It doesn't match it at all. It's completely different, right? I mean, if I'm willing to say anything, is that it's different from experiences. It's completely paradigmatically different. It's not just different colors, different sounds, anything like that. It is beyond different, right? It's inaccessible, different. So when you think about it, then if the mind has started developing, let's say evolutionarily, way back from, the Cambrian explosion or whatever, right? It started from nothing to something. It started with no experience to some experience, right? So you're working from not having experience to some kind of experience. Why would you think that experience you have worked towards is any kind of full representation of that which is outside that experience? That would be ridiculous. And if it's evolutionarily developed, then it would be that kind of experience that would be beneficial to have in order to react bodily to that experience, as if that experience is a representation of something outside your mind, right? that survival evolutionary instinct, so to say, is why there is this default setting as if my experience is the actual outside, because it makes sense to treat it as such. That will make you survive, or potentially more likely, compared to not doing it, right? Those cavemen who sat down and said, I wonder if that saber-toothed tiger really is a saber-toothed tiger. It's just an experience I'm having, right? They will be eaten, right? So those who said, that's a thing outside my mind, I'm going to run that way, they would survive, right? So that's why the default setting has evolved.
Fairly accurate in the same sense that a dial in the dashboard of instruments of an airplane provides accurate information about what's going on outside, information that you can react to and fly safely by instruments. But that, of course, doesn't mean that the world outside looks like a dashboard. And that's the key difference. The world outside may not be, and I'm highly convinced it's not, because there's plenty of evidence for it, the world outside may not be material in the way we think of it, discrete objects and a space-time scaffolding. That's the paradigm of the dashboard. It's accurate in the sense that it allows us to survive, allows us to react timely to environmental challenges by presenting what's relevant about the world at a glance to us on the screen of perception. It helps us avoid unlimited increases of entropy in our internal states. Now, this is complicated. It only means the following. If we saw...
Careful, mate, right? Entropy is a mental representation of something going on, right? It's not really going on because it's a mental representation. Be careful you don't jump into, okay, now I'm going to be a physicalist for a while I talk about entropy, right? And then jump back into idealism, right? This switch here, I have spotted that before, particularly with Bernardo Kastrup, where he sort of switches. Now I'm talking about entropy as if entropy is actually in that world my body is in, right? My actual body, so to say, or whatever it is, right? That which represents my my representation of body really is. How should I put it? And it's difficult, right? But entropy is a mental representation of something going on beyond that which you can experience. And that entropy is a derivative of your experiences. So there is no entropy as such, or you can't say what is there, but what is going on is not entropy. That's the mind's representation of it. Exactly in that dumbed down version that is evolutionarily advantageous, right?
The world as it actually is. In other words, if our perception mirrors the world as it actually is, then our internal states would be as unbound as the states of the world, which we have no control of. And that means that seeing alone could kill you.
No, but you have control of your own body, and you can rearrange that position of your body according to the mental representations in your mind that is honed exactly to do that. So you cannot change the world, but you can change your position in the world, right? You're not sitting there and looking at that saber-toothed tiger and saying, well, I can't change the world. So, but you can change yourself, your position in the world, so to say, right? Which is also a mental representation, and move the other way, right? So in that sense, you're changing the world, you could say.
It could increase the dispersion of your internal states to the point that you would melt into hot soup. And that's thermodynamics for you. So it has been shown mathematically already by...
You can't use mathematics to do metaphysics, right? Come on, man. It's this, jumping between science, materialism, and idealism that really, I wouldn't say pisses me off, that rubs me the wrong way, because that's screwed up, right? You have to stay with philosophy. You can't start to say, hey, somebody measured something, therefore this metaphysics. That doesn't work.
Person from the UK, that perception cannot mirror the world. We would die very quickly if it did that. Perception is an encoded, at a glance, overview of what is salient and relevant about the world, but it may look like nothing. It may look nothing like the world actually is.
Yeah, it's not something looking. Looking is experiential, right? I know what he's saying, right? And there is no words to put on this, right? It's a different paradigm that is inaccessible, right? That's where we're going.
Although it conveys accurate
Oh, we are not going there, but that's what we're trying to express, right?
information about the world. So that's the critical difference. The information is accurate, but it's presented in a way.
How do you know it's accurate? What do you mean by accurate? Explain this, Mr. Philosopher, right? It's accurate compared to what?
That is not.
Because it works for you? Then it's accurate. That's a circular argument, right? It's because it works, it must be accurate, and because it's accurate, therefore it works. It's sort of, we're going in circles now, right? Please explain how you know it's accurate.
The same as the world is in and of itself. It could not be the same.
Can I add something to that?
Okay, I think we will stop here at 22:32 and keep going in part 3 later. I also discovered that this is not 1.5 hour long, but 2.5 hour long. So I bet we are going to have something like 25 parts. Let's see how fast it goes, right? I usually relax a bit more. There's a lot of things to say in the start, and then I don't have to keep repeating the same point over and over. So it may be going a little faster, but why not take the time? That's what we're here for, right? That's what I'm here for, and hoping you are too, right? That's how I should put it. And if you're interested in a deep dive philosophy, well, then you're interested in what I'm doing here. Or I would hope so, right? Because I'm trying to take that deep dive and deconstructive, word by word, sentence by sentence, and so on. So if you like it, please share, like, and subscribe, and consider joining the Discord board link below. And there are also links to how you can donate to me if you think it's worth giving me some, economic power. See you in the next one.